All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. We're just going to give folks a second to get tuned in here, then we'll get going. Thanks for being with us. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marisa Elise Sanchez, and I'm a member of the Central Committee of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I'm speaking to you today from New York City, and I'll be chairing tonight's event. We're going to begin our program in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to ask everyone watching right now to just take a second and share this on your personal social media pages to help spread our message so that we can reach more people. Awesome. Thank you very much. So we want to begin by expressing our solidarity with all the immigrant workers, the non-citizens, the asylum seekers. We are one class, the working class, and we refuse to be dragged into the constant war against immigrant workers, the undocumented to the non-citizen. We are all workers regardless of nationality, and we are all essential. It is our class, the working class, who makes the world run. Today's webinar is a special commemoration of May Day, or International Workers' Day. Every year, May 1 is celebrated around the world as a day of international working class solidarity. Now, normally, May Day is actually celebrated with mass demonstrations that take place all over, from Africa to Asia, across South and North America, and in Europe. These events, which are organized by trade unions in some countries and by revolutionary parties or governments in others, all celebrate the struggle of the international working class. So this year, in order to adhere to the necessary social distancing and stay-at-home orders to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, workers across the world are finding alternative ways to commemorate this special day in working class history. In Cuba, for example, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of celebrations at home. Last week, we held Cancel the Rent car caravans in more than 45 cities, and in cities across the U.S., people are again going to be coming together in car caravans and solidarity actions, banging pots and pans in their neighborhoods to demand workers' rights. Tonight, in anticipation of May Day tomorrow, on this live stream, we will be presenting a chain of solidarity from workers in different sections of our class as we celebrate the struggle for class unity during a time of deepening crises. Before we turn to tonight's lineup of speakers, I want to make one more note on the history of the events that inspired May Day, and that is a wave of strikes and demonstrations for a shorter working day, followed by the Haymarket Square killings in Chicago, which occurred in the United States in 1886. The immediate outcome of that first wave of demonstrations was actually a tremendous setback for the labor movement, but only in the short term. The working class eventually turned the defeat into a victory for generations of workers all over the world, and May Day became a day to commemorate our class's continued struggle for liberation. Today, we see the power of the working class once again in action. Over the past 2 months, essential workers have been standing up across the country to demand personal protective equipment and other action from their employers to protect themselves against infection of coronavirus. This most recent strike wave is a response to the grotesque neglect from big corporations who care more about saving their bottom lines than they do about the lives of the workers who generate it. The scale of this wave has been the largest seen in decades. Over 1,000 collective actions nationwide have occurred since the beginning of March, and these are just the ones that made it to the media. All of these actions taking place from teachers to poultry workers to fast food workers to factory workers to delivery workers speak to the growing consciousness among all workers in response to the dangerous conditions that we are being forced to endure because capitalism as a system always puts profits before people. We stand with all the workers engaged in these actions across the country. So now, as one example of this wave of actions, I want to show a short video that highlights the media coverage of the thousands of people who joined car caravan protests last Saturday, April 25, as a part of the National Day of Car Caravans to demand a federal cancellation of the rents. This great video was produced on short notice by Mike Preisner and John Preisner, so we want to thank them for this excellent piece of people's media. And we'll go ahead and play that now.
Well, in Denver today, demonstrators gathered in their cars to call on government officials to cancel rent.
This protest was held in Lancaster.
In Albany Park.
People in Springfield gathered today.
In Harlem, protesters lined up on the corner of the McCombs Dam Bridge.
A protest on Chicago's North Side.
In Los Angeles.
In Boston, dozens of other tenants lining the street.
In Madison, demonstrators protested from their cars.
Dozens of people holding a car caravan protest in Knoxville.
The demonstration was part of a national push today.
They joined thousands of others across the U.S.
More than 40 cities participated.
The Party of Socialism and Liberation.
Party for Socialism and Liberation inviting dozens to get in their cars.
Each honk a message to state leaders that people need help making rent.
Calling on the government to help bail them out.
Where demonstrators demanded that rents and mortgages be canceled.
As well as a cancellation of mortgages for small business and homeowners.
Protesters are also asking for zero debt accumulation from landlords.
Calling for all people to have safe homes during the health crisis.
To use empty apartments to house the homeless.
More resources for the homeless and undocumented residents.
They also want ICE detainees to be released.
Financial problems in the face of the coronavirus pandemic continuing to build.
And this weekend, frustration boiling over.
A sign handed on from the side of a car speaks to the fears echoed by so many around the state. For many, rent is due next week.
May 1st is less than a week away, and with any calendar turn come bills.
In April alone, over 26 million people filed for unemployment across the nation, and 1/3 of tenants were unable to pay their rent.
Tens of millions of U.S. workers have lost their jobs, with record numbers of people applying for unemployment.
Organizers say it was a lack of government preparedness that led to the slow response to the virus, and workers shouldn't be the ones who are punished.
If we can't work, we can't pay. The dignity of our people is of the utmost concern.
Putting a moratorium isn't enough, because in a couple of months, people are going to have multiple months of rent due and they're going to not be able to pay it.
I don't know any average working person, certainly not myself, who can afford to pay 3 or 4 months of rent in one go.
We're all draining our savings pretty much. We're all just trying to survive however way we can.
Millions and millions of people should not be worrying about potentially getting evicted.
The government can do more and they choose not to.
The U.S. government has trillions of dollars that it can give to multinational corporations. The people, workers, need bailouts as well.
Now is the time to fight back. Now we know that we have all the power in this country, that as soon as people have to stop going to work, the country stalls, that we as the working class have the power to change society.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Mike and John. So now for a few words on tonight's solidarity messages. We know that our class is not homogeneous, that we all come from different backgrounds and experiences, that the conditions and oppression that we face are the consequences of the capitalist system. The existence of hunger, poverty, war, and homelessness, and manifestations of racism, sexism, and anti-LGBTQ bigotry are all due to the private ownership of the means of production by the tiny class of billionaires, the bourgeoisie, who exploit and live off the labor of the billions of workers across the globe. And we know that the ruling class has at its disposal the surplus value stolen from the world's producers and a repressive state apparatus of enormous capacity. That they have a propaganda machine in the form of the media, academia, and a host of ruling class think tanks that churn out a poisonous ideology to sow division in the working class, to pit our class against each other, and to keep us fighting amongst ourselves instead of the common enemy that oppresses and exploits all of us. Despite all of this, there is one weapon that we have, and it is an unrealized weapon. A weapon once honed and sharpened that will be more powerful than anything in the bourgeoisie's arsenal, and that is class consciousness and class unity. When the working class is united and acts in its own interests, there will be a tidal wave of revolutionary change, and that revolution will release the creative energy of our class, which which is a power we cannot underestimate. So that is the message that our speakers will be sharing tonight, as each gives voice to a message of solidarity with a different segment of the working class, young worker to old, white to black, men to women, and all of those in between. So our common message is that when we are united, we win. And to start us off, I would like to introduce Ernesto, a young member of the PSL. Welcome, Ernesto.
Thank you, Mirsa. Good evening to everyone watching. Today, I wanted to extend my solidarity with a segment of the population which is often forgotten, and that is our elders, and specifically those older workers who are forced to work past the age of retirement. I have often felt that one of the greatest crimes perpetrated by our system is that those who raised us, those who cared for us and forged us into who we are today, are completely isolated from the rest of society. Isolated socially because, just like the color of our skin, this system transforms a person's age into an inaccurate marker or indicator of someone's value. The capitalist system completely disregards elders once they have spent their entire life contributing to society, but can no longer work because of the limitations placed upon them by their age. Instead of caring for those who cared for us, this capitalist system plunges elders into poverty, either because, again, they can't work, or because the Social Security provided for them is not at all adequate to the life that they deserve to live. As a student, someone who's 18, my youth doesn't prevent me from feeling a powerful connection and a powerful solidarity with older generations, because the system which forgets the old is the same system which disregards the young. The system which lets elders rot is the same system which allowed the rotting of our planet and has robbed both the young and the old of a healthy world. So I call upon my peers, the youth of the world, the students of the world, to stop superficially respecting elders, but instead to respect our elders by uniting with them in the struggle against our collective oppressors, against the rich, the corporations, and the whole capitalist system. From young to old, we all have the same enemies, and we shouldn't let this system divide us. We must work together to build a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for your words. Expression of solidarity with older working class people, older people everywhere. My name is Preston, and you know, it's sad to say it. We know, though, that the history of violent racism against Black community, Black sisters and brothers, can be traced all the way back to the beginning and founding of this country, to the slave trade, to Jim Crow, to the rise of the KKK, segregation and institutional racism in all areas of society, including education, jobs, healthcare. So no, it's not a new situation that the raging epidemic of COVID-19 should be occurring now and leaving Black communities devastated by the virus, disproportionately falling ill and dying in much greater numbers. It's not surprising based on the history of the United States and its racist formation, but it's not okay. In Michigan, for example, 14% of the state's population is African American, but 33% of the coronavirus cases in Michigan are Black people, and 41% of deaths from the virus are Black people. As is true in Michigan and everywhere in the US, Black people and people of color, including Indigenous people, are, through institutionalized racism and discrimination, relegated to the lowest paying, the hardest, and the most risky and dangerous jobs: food service workers, hotel workers, warehouse workers, retail, agriculture, meat packing, and so forth. If then you add the infection rate and death rate of Black and brown people under mass incarceration in our prisons, the numbers are staggering. Action is required by all of us who love human life and well-being for everyone. It's about the struggle. Wherever we look in history, the pain and brutality are everywhere to be seen. As we now mobilize to fight the virus, all of us together, we must remember this: no struggle can succeed without understanding the evils of racism and imperialism and mobilizing to fight all of it, leaving no one behind. Solidarity. The right of Black Americans to self-determination and justice must be supported by all of us as we move forward. Together in solidarity, we must win this fight, and we will.
Thank you, Preston, for your words of solidarity with Black workers. My name is Sasha, and I want to say a few words about immigrant workers. Like Preston said, the history of Black workers is drenched in the blood and legacy of slavery and violent and racist repression. Throughout history, the ruling class has used divide and conquer strategies to separate workers. Racist divisions tell workers that immigrants steal our jobs and that immigrants look down on Black workers. But we reject these divisions because in reality, immigrant workers are the ones on the front lines and are getting exploited throughout this very crisis. Immigrant workers are the ones who are working with no hazard pay to feed their families and all of ours. Immigrant workers are the ones who face the threats of deportation and were not able to receive the $1,200 that so many workers desperately needed in this crisis. Now, all of a sudden, the essential class has been labeled, but immigrant workers are not being told that they're a part of that, even though they are direly a part of that very class. The reality is that we want to express solidarity with immigrant workers and the immigrant community because they are desperately a part of the working class as a whole and a part of keeping our communities together. Black workers have nothing to gain from keeping ourselves completely divided from what immigrant workers do. We are all being oppressed and exploited by the same oppressor. And when we're able to see that, we can come together and fight for the gains that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Sasha, for your expression of solidarity with immigrant families. The centuries of oppression imposed on Black Americans shows the boundless cruelty of capitalism from its inception on this continent. My name is Joel. I grew up as a second-generation Mexican-American. My grandfather worked the fields as a bracero farm worker during World War II, and he never received full payment promised to him for his service. My father was deported to a country he only knew as a child and was murdered in a border town. My family faced many hardships and discrimination living under a capitalist system that wanted our labor power, but did not want to provide any labor rights, and instead wanted us living in the shadows as an army of invisible workers. This is why I find common cause with other workers around me, workers who are also expected to receive less in pay and benefits, who are also expected to be silent and invisible. This is why I stand in solidarity with women workers. Today, sexism is still a grinding reality. Women workers continue to be paid less than their male counterparts, continue to be mainly responsible for, quote, second shift domestic work, and continue to face sexual violence, including rape, sexual assault, and harassment. The recent wave of right-wing attacks against reproductive choices are another example of the way the capitalist seeks to maintain the oppression of women workers. As a male worker, I stand with women in their struggle. Together we can fight back against the patriarchy and the capitalist system that perpetuates it. Women have always fought back against oppression, and they are not alone in this struggle. All workers should stand up for women's rights. This is why I stand in solidarity with women workers in the struggle for socialism and to build unity with women everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Joel, for your story and for your solidarity. My name is Carla, and I too am the daughter of immigrants, of Salvadorian immigrants. And I understand this experience of being hyper-exploited and dehumanized, where your access to basic human rights really depend on your legal status. So thank you again for your solidarity with women. Right now, women work 52% of essential jobs. 9 out of 10 women are in nursing, and 78% are social workers. The entire work of reproducing the working class, the work of taking care of children, of preparing meals, of cleaning, elder care, it all falls on women. In the United States, the unpaid labor work of women is $1.5 trillion, and globally this skyrockets to $10.9 trillion. And this is why developing women's leadership is so important in building a revolutionary organization. I'm one of the managing editors of Breaking the Chains, the only socialist and feminist publication in the country that tackles women's issues from a class perspective that builds unity with other sectors of the working class here and around the world. So thank you again, Joel, for your solidarity. And I also want to express solidarity with Asian American workers in the United States, because right now the US government is focused on whipping up anti-Asian, specifically anti-Chinese bigotry. The racist associations between China and the virus, like when Trump called COVID-19 the China virus, have led to over 1,000 hate crimes against Asian Americans, and those are only the reported crimes. This anti-China propaganda, really an effort to ramp up war and militarization against China, leads to violence against our Asian American neighbors. And I wholeheartedly reject this anti-Asian racism, and I refuse to accept any attempts to scapegoat a country and its people. We should continue to challenge any racist narratives we encounter. In reality, war is a threat, militarization is a threat, not Asian American workers. And this is why I stand in solidarity with Asian workers in the struggle for socialism.
Thank you, Carla. My name is Judy Chang, and I thank you for your solidarity with Chinese and all Asian workers. Chinese Americans have been historically victimized by racism and white supremacy, starting with the 1887 Chinese Exclusion Act. The recent wave of anti-Chinese bashing shows that it's still an issue today. I thank you for that solidarity. I would like to say a few words in solidarity with poor white workers. 76% of the US population is white, and 10% of those are considered impoverished. Even that is an underestimation, as being impoverished means an income of no more than $25,000 a year for a family of 4. Even though Black and Latino communities suffer high rates of poverty compared with the white population overall, there is an estimated 25 million poor white workers in the United States, even though the mainstream media likes to portray the poor as mostly Black. Since 2001, 43,000 factories have closed in the United States, leaving 35 million workers laid off. People are working more for less, and more are struggling to pay for basic necessities like food, healthcare, and housing. Food stamp applications in white suburban areas have also increased by 200%. Politicians play on the fear that white workers have that foreign workers are taking our jobs away, fueling anti-Chinese, anti-immigrant hatred. Politicians like to whip up feelings among white workers of patriotism, national pride, and white supremacy. The images and misleading messages we see on TV and in the news every day are designed to divide us. White against Black, Black against Asian, Asian against Latinos. When companies lay off workers, it doesn't matter if you're Black, white, Asian, or Latino. What motivates these companies is billions and billions of dollars in profits that they can pocket. That's called capitalism. Working class white workers have more in common with Asian and all other workers than they do with factory bosses and the corporate elite. What we need right now is solidarity. The US workers have nothing to gain by putting trust in capitalist political parties that line the pockets of Wall Street bankers and CEOs. We, the workers, can run the factories. We can decide our own future. We can organize high quality education, housing, and healthcare. That's called socialism. And together we can make it happen. This is why I stand in solidarity with white workers in the struggle for socialism and build in unity with Max.
Thank you, Judy. That is the kind of solidarity that the entire multinational working class needs. My name is Max, and I, as a poor working class person, stand in solidarity with Asian workers in the struggle against racism. I thank you for your solidarity. The ruling class wants to make us think our interests are incompatible, while in reality, all working and oppressed people are constantly under the threat of capitalism. And now we see more attacks against LGBTQ folks. At a time when the death toll in the US surpasses 60,000 people, the Trump administration will finalize a rule to roll back healthcare discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. This was first proposed last year, and it's being pushed through in the middle of a pandemic. A rule to allow the discrimination from healthcare providers when trans folks in particular struggle accessing healthcare services free of discrimination and harassment. Now it could be legal again to deny services to people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. LGBTQ folks also face disproportionate homelessness, where 40% of the youth homeless population are LGBTQ. That puts LGBTQ people at even higher risks when they have no home to go to during a global crisis. I've been evicted in the past year and was kicked out of another spot where I didn't have a lease at the start of a pandemic. Both times I was taken in and housed by trans women, and I would do the same for them. That is the kind of solidarity that the working class needs. Comrades together in the struggle, willing to house the houseless. Comrades willing to sacrifice for each other, regardless of difference in identity or the difference of character of the oppression we face. I remember the supposed bathroom bill when it first passed in North Carolina, which was an attack on all workers, veiled to transphobic workers as protecting their daughters, and the movement for moral revival against it, where communities came together to fight alongside the LGBTQ community against that assault on all workers. Only we can fight for a better world, together in the fight for socialism. And that is why I stand in solidarity with LGBTQ workers in the struggle for socialism and to build in unity with them.
Comrade Max, like I said, thank you for your solidarity with LGBTQ workers. Good evening, comrades. My name is Carly Chardonnay Webb. I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm Black, I'm trans, I'm a woman, and I'm a member of the proletariat, and I'm damn proud of it. And I stand in solidarity with unionized workers because even in this pandemic, we have a duty to win. Because capital has been laid bare by the recent situation, and they're getting a serious lesson in Marx 101 because they're realizing it's workers, not hedge fund managers, not CEOs that make this thing work. And that's why they want you back to work so darn fast. And they're even praising the heroism of quote unquote essential workers, even if those essential workers are largely unorganized in the workplace. Union membership, 10.3%. Union membership in the public sector, 33.6% of total workers. Now is the time to really dig in and stand with our brothers, sisters, and others in organized labor, because capital is organized, so labor must be organized. And right now, labor is reorganizing. We remember the recent victories of the teachers in West Virginia and Oklahoma. We here in where I'm based in the Northeast, we are still looking at the great wins of grocery workers in New England. But there's still so much more that needs to be done. And right now there's a full court press against unionization. Consider what Court Furniture Rental's doing, based in New Jersey, subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. Yes, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. Right now they're purging delivery and warehouse workers who are currently in procedures to attempt to unionize, and they're trying to use the coronavirus crisis as a pretext. And of course, there's our friends at Amazon, well-known anti-union actor. They've been reported purging workers in 15 states for merely starting the conversation on organizing unions. Then here's something that really stupefies the mind. HCA Healthcare, they're threatening to sack nurses to delay a union vote in North Carolina. The same North Carolina where only 2% of workers are unionized. In the middle of a pandemic where their curve is still growing and the number of cases are still growing. And they've also already purged workers in 2 other states. And something near and dear to my heart as a journalist in the media profession, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, just in this past month, 28 unionized workers in their newsroom, gone. One of the nation's great newspapers is now a group of lower paid, web-based stringers who are non-union. Union journalism has long been a sentinel of truth-telling in this democracy, and now hedge fund managers and major media corporations are sealing that off and giving you half-truths. This is why we as a proletariat have to get like France, as in when one sector is under attack, all sectors must rally. No matter what your identity is, no matter who you are, first and foremost, we're all the working class. And now it's time to push for democracy in our workplaces because they know they can't work without us. And unions are among the most effective means to gain liberation throughout organizations, throughout our history. Unions have led the way when they're organized, and when they're organized, numerous and strong, and we have to get in and back unions and back the workers trying to form them. But also, we have to engage with organized labor, not only to strengthen them, but also to help guide a greater class consciousness. Because we find ourselves in a period where we may not be able to be in the streets, but our aims for a better world and a more equitable world for all is now in the discussion seriously. And many are looking at these issues and are calling the workers heroes. And our job is to organize, because when this crisis abates itself, and even if it doesn't for a long time, our class will be out in the picket lines. Our class will be out in the barricades, and it is the job of all of the proletariat to be on the barricades with them. That's how we make a better world, and a better world is possible. And that's why I stand in solidarity with unionized workers.
Thank you so much, Comrade Chardonnay, for your solidarity. Buenas tardes a todos. My name is Jael Castro. I am a teacher in San Francisco, and my union has had my back and has created a sense of security around my job. My union protects me and my colleagues from being overworked and other forms of being taken advantage of. And I want to express my solidarity today as a union worker to all the workers that don't have a union yet. Workers without a union are grossly taken advantage of by their employers. Workers' rights are not often respected. Folks are asked to work overtime, folks are asked to work on the weekends, and proper compensation is not guaranteed. Workers also work under the fear that they can lose their job at any point in the year because there's no contract to hold their employers accountable. And if there is a professional or personal issue with their employer, the communication is top-down, employer to employee. And so again, compromises are not promised. This reality existed before the pandemic, and it still exists now, and it's even much more amplified at a greater scale because of COVID-19. Without a union, essential workers are forced to put their lives at risk and be on the front line against the virus. From grocery workers, warehouse workers, to healthcare workers and more, folks are not receiving hazard pay and proper protection equipment. And with being overworked, they don't have the opportunity or the time to organize a union and demand such rights. And there is a contradiction I want to point out. One would assume that when companies are doing poorly, workers suffer. But in reality, workers suffer when companies are doing poorly and when they're doing well. For example, Trader Joe's and Amazon, as Chardonnay had mentioned before, they have actually been profiting during this pandemic, yet we're not seeing them use their newfound wealth to protect their workers during this time. And I say this because it is so critical to have a union with or without a pandemic. Now, as a union member who has been protected during this time, I stand in solidarity with all working people. Workers, with or without a union, we have to come together to protect each other. We got the power, and it's called worker power. And this is why I stand in solidarity with non-union workers.
Thank you, Jael, for your solidarity. I'm so happy to be a part of this important webinar in honor of International Workers' Day. My name is Tara Oliveira, and I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. For the past year and a half, I've also been an after-school program leader at the Free Library of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia considers us temporary, seasonal, and part-time workers, which disqualifies us from union representation, despite the fact that many of us have worked there in the city in the same role for years, some of us for even over a decade. As long as the capitalist system exists, employers will always find ways to underpay, exploit, and limit the rights of labor. As a non-union worker, I stand in solidarity with all workers and the unemployed, and I want to talk about the importance of standing in solidarity with workers who are disabled, workers which the capitalist system has continuously allowed to be discriminated against and denied. The so-called Fair Labor Standards Act states that workers with physical or mental disabilities, including those related to age or injury, are exempt from even receiving a minimum wage, which is already an inadequate sum of $7.25 an hour. Capitalists are unwilling to spend money to make accommodations for those with physical disabilities, and thus discriminate in the hiring process. Also, countless overexploited workers who might be experiencing a mental health crisis or who are in need of addiction treatment not only do not have access to health care, but those who are employed fear losing their jobs if they were to take the time off to seek the treatment they need. Since the COVID pandemic started, tens of millions of people in the US have lost their jobs. And for many of these workers, that also means losing their health care. Without the right to health care, the financial burden of living with a disability is compounded. All workers should have the right to a job, to union representation, to healthcare, to a livable wage, and so much more. This is why I stand in solidarity with disabled workers, and this is what we at the Party for Socialism and Liberation are fighting for.
Thank you so much, Tara. My name is Sunil, and I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. As a disabled person, I've experienced considerable discrimination over the years, and I'm very proud to express solidarity with frontline healthcare workers who I've known for many, many years. As a child growing up, I was very active physically. I played in the Little League baseball. I played pickup basketball games informally with friends around the school. Summers, I mowed lawns all around the neighborhood when I was in high school for a number of years. When I was 18 years old, final exams freshman year of college, I started to have pain in my neck and my back, and it was a mystery pain for 1 year until just about a year later, the pain spread to my hip. And at that point, doctors were able to diagnose me with ankylosing spondylitis, which is a type of arthritis. I've walked with a cane since then, which has been almost 45 years or so. And in 1976, both my hips were replaced in operations, and both those hips have been replaced in the years since then. As a person with a disability, I have extensive experience with capitalism and healthcare and how they interact. When I was in my 30s, there was a good long stretch of time in which I was not able to get health insurance. It was denied specifically because of my pre-existing condition. And then in 1997, I had a terrible experience of walking for months on crutches after what I thought was an arthritis flare-up. It turned out I'd been walking on an artificial hip that was out of the socket. And that was literally because HMO health insurance company was working to maximize its profits. So I have extensive experience with what healthcare can be under capitalism, and it's not a good picture. Now, undoubtedly, other people have experienced far worse than I have over the years, but I have to say it's through the work of dedicated healthcare workers that I was able to get through that crisis and other crises as well. And in my experience with healthcare workers, there have been times that literally I would not be alive if not for the dedicated work of frontline healthcare workers. Now, I should say in all honesty that during times of physical rehabilitation in rehab centers, I probably grumbled a few times at my physical therapists, but they were dedicated, hardworking, skilled, compassionate people, and together they guided me through the process of regaining strength. And regaining your strength after 4 total hip replacements and 1 cardiac triple bypass is tremendous amount of work. It's hard work, but as we're saying here in this collection of talks, we're all workers, and together with those healthcare workers that I'm so proud to stand in solidarity with, I was able to regain my strength and be ready to rejoin the struggle for a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunil, for your solidarity with healthcare workers. My name is Doug, and me and other healthcare workers remain on the front lines in the battle for all of our lives as our government continues to utterly fail us. The US continues to throw money at Wall Street and the Pentagon every single day. We don't need fighter jets flying over our hospitals while our patients and our coworkers die. These superficial gestures, while our sisters and brothers are still wearing trash bags, is absolutely criminal. Our refrain across the country from the halls of our hospitals is the same. We stay here for you, you stay home for us. For many of you, this is no longer a matter of choice because you've lost your jobs. We healthcare workers stand in complete solidarity with the over 20% in the US that are now unemployed and the 4 million who are added every single week as the economy continues to crash around us. We will advocate for your needs and fight alongside you. We will not abandon you behind the false dichotomy of essential and non-essential workers. All workers are essential to our society. Only the bosses are superfluous. A one-time $1,200 payment and access to a small fraction of your wages is unacceptable. We demand that all unemployed workers receive their full wages, that all rent and mortgages and debt be canceled. The only way to ensure that as many of us make it out of this pandemic as possible is to ensure that all those who have been put out of work are truly cared for. The politicians and media will spread whatever lies they can to suggest that you as poor, unemployed working people should be trotted back out to your jobs as a sacrifice at the altar of big banks and corporations. But we are done with sacrifice for the rich. If your utility tries to shut off your electricity or the heat, there will be doctors beside you to march on that company and turn it back on. When your landlord sends the sheriff to evict you, us nurses and hospital workers will put your furniture back in your house. The second it is safe again, we will pour out of the hospitals into the streets and demand that you get your jobs back immediately. You will never be alone in this fight.
Thank you, Doug, for your story and solidarity. My name is Kim, and as an unemployed worker, I want to extend my solidarity to incarcerated workers. Black people are subjected to an epidemic in the US called racist mass incarceration, the epidemic that disproportionately incarcerates Black and brown people. Every president, every member of Congress, whether they be Republican or Democrat, has had a hand in the system of slavery. Prisons are not here to rehabilitate or keep the public safe. They're here to isolate, intimidate, and to place fear in the hearts of Black and brown people, workers in general, to divide the working class even further, and of course, to make the 1% richer. The United States spends $80 billion per year to keep over 2.3 million people incarcerated. And that number doesn't even include the 60,000 plus juveniles who are sitting in detention centers as well. Our tax money, your tax money, goes to incarcerate 1 in every 15 Black men. So while we fight for the liberation of Black men on the outside, let's not forget about the Black men who are not being fed and being placed in solitary confinement for months on end for simply reading a book. While we are standing up for women, it is time we stand up for the women behind bars for whom are only given 5 pads per period, and whose sexual abuse rate is 3 times higher than that of men. If this country really wanted to protect us, it wouldn't imprison more of us than any other country in the world. As we come together for trans rights, come together as well for the trans women locked away in cages, where they are 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than anyone else. While we protect the youth in our neighborhoods, let us also protect the 1 in 8 who are sexually abused while in detention centers. Not only are men and women subject to inhumane living conditions, denied sunlight, nutrition, they're forced to work and sell their labor for 14 to 63 cents an hour. In the midst of a pandemic, people incarcerated are still being thrown into solitary confinement, not being given regular health screenings, and living in unsanitary conditions where a virus could flourish. It is time that we stand up and dismantle this system, this capitalist system that incarcerates and continues to enslave Black and brown people. And that is why I stand in solidarity with incarcerated workers in the struggle for socialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Kim, for your powerful words about the real crime of mass incarceration. And I agree with you so much that so many Black and brown and all poor prisoners are in these concentration camps. My name is Gloria Lariva, and I'm a founding member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We're now 6 weeks into the state of emergency since it was declared, and each day new crises arise that affect large numbers of people, both due to the coronavirus, but also to the economic crisis, which is becoming so severe. I appreciate hearing all the statements of mutual solidarity because it is such a powerful tool. It's the antidote to the divide and conquer tactics of the ruling class. And the day that these powerful bonds of solidarity that are expressed tonight are forged among the people of the US, together with the peoples of the world, is the day that the capitalist power is broken. And we, the working class, can run the world, as we already do, but free of profits and war, discrimination and oppression. I want to cover a few key issues in my talk. One is that of Native people in the United States, the more than 570 nations that are in reality one. That unity and identity was best expressed by the months of resistance at Standing Rock in 2016 to defend water, that most precious of resources. But the very real legacy of genocide continues today, with the continued theft of Native land and resources, while government funding is slashed. It is outrageous that in the first CARES package of early April, only $8 billion was allocated for all Native communities, rural and urban, to cover all the needs of healthcare, housing, food, and jobs, and only $1 billion for the Indian health centers. The result of this criminal government neglect is an excessively high number of illnesses and deaths due to the virus in Navajo or Diné land in Arizona and New Mexico. 50% of all cases in Native country are on Navajo land. The isolation on the reservations exacerbates the situation. On Pine Ridge Reservation, for example, the average wages on that land for Native people is between $2,600 and $3,500 a year. That's an absolute crime. But on that land, the Black Hills, there's gold mining, uranium mining, that the mining corporations make billions in profits. That's Native land, and it must be returned back to the Oglala Lakota. This brings me to another struggle, that is of the great Native leader, Leonard Peltier, who is now 44 years behind bars. He's a victim of the political persecution of the American Indian movement by the US government in the 1960s and 70s, because they dared to defend their right to their sovereignty, to their land and resources, defending people on Pine Ridge. And we're honored that Leonard Peltier is our vice presidential candidate in the Lariva Peltier Socialist ticket of 2020. If you want to understand why Leonard was railroaded into prison for so long, despite being factually innocent, you can relate that to what also happened to the Black Panther Party, with US and FBI persecution against the liberation and civil rights movements that arose in the 60s. The government declared war on these movements and used its so-called COINTELPRO program, the counterintelligence, to try to destroy the liberation movements. This is why Leonard Peltier is in prison, why Mumia Abu-Jamal is in prison, why Mutulu Shakur and so many other political prisoners are still in, despite decades of imprisonment, with each of them suffering from serious illness, being over 65, and under the greatest threat with the possible exposure to the COVID-19, especially when you consider how atrocious healthcare in the prisons is. There are new political prisoners like Julian Assange, who the US wants to deep six into a supermax for having dared to publicize US war crimes to the world, and Chelsea Manning, whom the US has punished for her revelation for these crimes against humanity. She was finally freed due to political pressure, but the persecution against her doesn't end. These people who I've mentioned are political prisoners, and the UN Human Rights Commission in April even called for political prisoners worldwide to be among the first freed. Of course, the US gets around that by claiming that there are no political prisoners in the US. There are. And I want to recommend that viewers watch, when you have time, the documentary on Leonard Peltier's struggle called Incident at Oglala. And please feel free. We welcome you, we invite you, we urge you to write letters to these brothers and sisters behind bars. In my time visiting Leonard Peltier and other political prisoners over the years, I'm always stunned when I visit the prisons filled to overflowing with people who are victims of capitalism, of poverty, of racism, of being excess labor whom the system has no use for. The explosion in the US prison population is a result of politicians in the 70s and the 80s who built their careers by being so-called tough on crime. Yet at the same time that they locked poor people up, they promoted and defended the greatest criminal enterprise in the world, capitalism and its military machine in the Pentagon. Some prisons and jails have released people with parole violations or awaiting trial because of the virus, but it's not enough. We demand the immediate release of Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Mutula Shakur, and so many thousands of elder prisoners, and the freeing of hundreds of thousands of prisoners more. With a deepening economic crisis and millions literally without any money, we say this: when there's no formal employment or economic help, people are forced to survive through informal means. It's a fact of life. And finally, sisters and brothers, we need to work hard to help our people in this country overcome and break the political isolation forced on us by the US government. How many people in the world, and how many people in the US, know that there have been only 10 deaths due to the coronavirus in Venezuela? It's astounding, right? But it's true. And you can read the figures from their Ministry of Health. In Cuba, 58 people have died, and everyone who is tested positive is taken care of in isolation, and they do contact tracing. How have they achieved such a low rate in those countries? It's simple. Cuba is socialist, and Venezuela has a revolutionary government struggling with the people to build socialism. Both enjoy free healthcare provided by the famed Cuban doctors who are traveling worldwide to save lives. That's the superiority, the social superiority, and organized structure of a socialist system that puts people first. Yet the media and US government trash Venezuela every day, portraying the country as if people are crawling through the streets, starving and lacking medicine. That's not true. People are not crawling in the streets, but they are lacking medicine due to US banks and the US government that are blocking virtually all government food and medical imports to the country. Or how many people know that more than 70 countries that were helped by China with medical shipments, that they flew everywhere, that only Cuba was blocked from that aid due to the US imperialist cruelty called the blockade. Instead of the US engaging in international cooperation and solidarity, as Cuba and China have done, the US has sent warships to the Caribbean, threatening Venezuela. It's a real danger. And you know, Cuba is famous for more than 1 million people in Havana alone, and hundreds of thousands across the island who march to celebrate International Workers' Day every May Day. This year they had to cancel, but they have turned that necessity into a virtue and say that this year, the Plaza de la Revolución, Revolution Square, where the march usually takes place, that the plaza will be in everyone's home. So tomorrow, on May Day, sisters and brothers, everybody, when we're distancing socially in our homes, let's turn May Day into a renewed commitment of solidarity with each other and with every struggle for justice and for true liberation, for socialism. And from Palestine to Cuba, from Mexico to Syria, to China, and here at home from the Appalachians to the Bronx and Harlem, from Los Angeles to the native reservations, there are no borders in the workers' struggle. Viva el 1 de Mayo. Long live International Workers' Day. Long live socialism.
All right, thank you, Gloria, and thank you to all of our comrades who spoke tonight, creating an unbreakable chain of solidarity to build class unity and the struggle for working people. More than 26 million workers have filed for unemployment in the last 5 weeks. A third of renters were unable to pay rent in April, and rent is due again tomorrow. Within the context of this deepening crisis, which the working class will bear the burden of, we take these messages forward. We must not allow the ruling class to explain the unfolding economic downturn by blaming and pitting against each other different segments of the working class. We must unite together against our common enemy, the fat cat Wall Street bankers who once again are being bailed out. It is by uniting the working class against them, our real enemy, the capitalists, that the problems of capitalist society can be overcome and that we can organize society to meet the needs of the many and not just the few. So before we end, I actually want to show one more short video featuring the National Day of Car Caravan protest this past Saturday. So we'll show that now and then we will close out.
If you don't have a source of income right now, then you essentially are just expected to accumulate that debt over these months while we're under the pandemic. And that's not what we need right now. What we need is an entire cancellation of rent.
If they haven't trillions of dollars to take out from our taxes, from our money to bail out Wall Street, they need to bring that money to us.
Philadelphia to cancel the rent today, this very hour, that they act with the same urgency requisite to the harm caused. Working people need rent cancellation today. How are we going to do it? We're going to build a mass movement.
All right, great. So I want to encourage everyone to visit pslweb.org for a listing of May Day activities happening tomorrow that the PSL has organized or is participating in. And I want to remind everyone that you can follow the PSL on social media at PSLWeb on Twitter and Instagram, and you can read our analysis on liberationnews.org. And I want to invite you to join us this Saturday, May 2nd at 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern for PSL in Espanol. And remember, thinking about socialism is good, thinking and talking about socialism is better, but building a revolutionary socialist party is best of all. And if you're interested in joining the PSL, you can apply online today at pslweb.org/join. All right, thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night.
Bye, comrades.
Yeah, bye, y'all.
Buenas noches.
Everybody was so great.
Here.
Good night, everyone.
Look forward to meeting you.
Nice to see you, Chardonnay.
It is good to
Good
see
night,
you.
everyone.
It's good to see you, ma'am. It is good to see you.
Thank you, Gloria, Marissa, everyone.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.
Good to see everyone.
Hi, comrades.
Thank you for running. Now we have a real voice and a real choice in 2020. It's exactly what we need.
Yes.